But yeah, so the Sabaton history of Ghost Division, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. As I said, actually, in the song reaction to Ghost Division, I said that I might provide a little bit more kind of information on Rommel himself, and that's what I plan to do, because given from the title of this, that's what it seems to be somewhat about. So, without further ado, going to get into this. Auto captions are on, so if they're dodgy, I'll turn them off. But otherwise, let's learn some history.
Hello everyone, my name is Erwin Rommel.
Yes, and I am Erwin Rommel's assistant, Candy. And this is Sabaton history.
Okay, I'm gonna turn captions off. Yes, I am Erwin Rommel's assistant Candy, and this is 7th on history. Okay, yeah, captions are going off.
You asked for it, and now you got it.
Ghost Division.
You wanted the best?
You got the best!
Ghost Division!
I think they've been on something a little bit.
At 5:30 a.m. on May 10th, 1940, the great German gamble in the West, Case Yellow, was about to begin. General Major Erwin Rommel had just a few months earlier been transferred from the Führer Begleit Battalion to the command of the German 7th Panzer Division. As part of the 15th Motorized Armee Corps, it would be the mission of his 7th to guard the right flank of Panzer Group Kleist, which was to drive a Schwerpunkt into France. His immediate goal was to penetrate the Belgian border defenses and push through the densely forested and hilly terrain of the Ardennes forest as quickly as possible. Time was essential. They only had a short window of 3 or 4 days to cross the River Meuse. If they did not manage that, the whole offensive might fail. From the get-go, Rommel pushed his division hard. Vital to his advance were the motorcycle and armored reconnaissance units of Kladschützen Battalion 7, who raced ahead to scout and clear the quickest route for his tanks. These ultra-mobile units could not only cover a large distance much more quickly than any tank, but also could carry enough firepower to tackle obstacles and resistance. Advancing rapidly, the division moved the first day across the river Ourthe and made headway to Dinant, advancing 90 kilometers in a single day. They soon outpaced their neighboring units, the 5th Panzer Division to the north and the 23rd Infantry Division to the south, and contact was repeatedly lost. With the Meuse just 35 kilometers away, Rommel wanted to rest for a minimal amount of time and be on the move again as quickly as possible. Looking neither left nor right, he raced ahead with his forward units of his tanks, keeping close contact only with his reconnaissance units. At Dinant, they smashed through a strong French force, and the 7th got its first real taste of armored combat. By the afternoon of the 12th, his forces had already reached the mighty River Meuse. Now, this far, Rommel had enjoyed the blessings of his superior, General Hermann Hoth, who supported the idea of aggressive tank spearheads. Taking risks was necessary. And thanks to Rommel, the Meuse had been indeed reached in record time. But it needed to be crossed. Kleist, commanding the whole Panzer Corps, opted to rest his units for the night. After they had reorganized and gotten enough support from the air, they would begin the crossing of the Meuse late afternoon the next day.
Yeah, so as we will find out, Rommel wasn't particularly about that. But I just want to talk briefly again on the Blitzkrieg theory. So I mentioned it in the Sabaton, on the Ghost Division actual song reaction. I'm just going to mention it here is because, again, speed is all about what's key to Blitzkrieg. Because the whole idea, again, is not necessarily to fight people in Blitzkrieg. It's to punch through lines and cause as much havoc as you possibly can, because when you fight, that's how you get bogged down. And much like Rommel's kind of frustration with his own kind of command structure, or his own kind of neighbouring accompanying units, their desire to kind of rest and stuff like that, he saw it as losing an opportunity, losing initiative. The longer you wait, the stronger your enemy gets. And, you know, think of it kind of in a boxing analogy. Blitzkrieg is somebody who is extremely fast, and they have an extremely strong punch. You know, obviously the way but they don't have a lot of stamina. So they're extremely fast. They have an extremely heavy punch, but they can't really last deep into the rounds. So they need to deliver that knockout blow really early. And the best way that they can do that is landing hard punches time and time and time again, and hopefully keep their foe on the back foot. keeping them on their heel until they either go down, or other circumstances can be arranged. And that's kind of the analogy that I think is best suited for Blitzkrieg, because the longer you go into this boxing bout, the less kind of this fast, agile boxer kind of does when you have somebody who can take those punches and still get back up, e.g. Soviet Union. But yeah, so Blitzkrieg in general, as he said, those motorcycle divisions. So it's the thrust with armor, it's the thrust with mechanized and motorized divisions, and particularly fast divisions like the motorcycles. Although they were used as scouts, as he said, they could be used actually as kind of mobile infantry, essentially. They could go, and when they meet resistance, they could dismount and have enough weaponry on them in order to kind of deal havoc their own way. And so that's kind of what Rommel was trying to do, and by punching through the line with that armoured spearhead, as you saw earlier with the different panzer corps there, again, I said it before, most of the German army was not armoured, they were not mechanised or motorised, but that spearhead, that force concentration is what changes what changes everything. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit.
Rommel, however, thought that air support would be modest at best, and instead ordered only a short rest for his division. At first light, the 7th went on the attack again. It was a hard fight. The French would not let them cross without resistance, but the hasty attack prevented the French from putting together enough force to stop them. Personally leading his tanks across the Meuse, Rommel remained always close to the fighting. From his experience as a stormtroop leader in the Great War, Rommel knew the importance of keeping the initiative. Speed would be both their sword and their shield. The faster they advanced, the more likely it was to catch the enemy off guard. They had to ensure that the battle would be fought on their terms.
Yeah, so that's just following up exactly practically what I said. By using speed, by using that initiative, by being hyper-aggressive, it's the cliche thing, the best defense is a good offense. But the idea that an inferior force, if you will, in terms of numbers, can cause havoc. That's what makes kind of the Blitzkrieg kind of theory, if you will, so effective. Because it's this strong, concentrated power of force that punches through lines, that acts on their own initiative. And that's the thing, it wasn't just Rommel that done this. Part of the whole German kind of armoured corps, as they said, they agreed that risk should be taken and things like this, is because what a lot of kind of panzer commanders would do is once they would punch through lines or they had orders to go to certain objectives. If an objective was deemed too heavily fortified, but they saw a target of opportunity, then most of the time they had relatively free rein to ignore the kind of heavy defended target, unless it was, mission critical, and head off and, pick on the softer targets, act on those targets of opportunity to, again, cause as much havoc, cause as much mayhem, cause as much, communication supply issues as physically possible. And I'm glad that he actually spoke about Rommel's career in the First World War as well, because I believe he was a lieutenant, and I think he served in the Italian campaign, as well as, I want to say, in the Eastern Front as well, but I might be wrong on that. I need to fact check that myself. But yeah, as a stormtrooper as well. So even as an infantryman, he still showed that kind of hyper aggressive, that hyper kind of need to take the initiative in the fight, and that just carried over perfectly when he was put in charge of panzers. But yeah,
the invasion has begun. Shaking the ground with the force of 1,000 guns. First in the line of fire, first into hostile land, tanks leading the way.
While the mass of German troops was busy crossing the Meuse all that whole day, Rommel did not even think of rest. He had to move west, ever west. It did not take long for strong French and Belgian forces to find them. Their superior heavy Char B-1 and SOMUA tanks threatened his troops with disaster time and time again. But Rommel's energetic leadership and improvisation skills gave him the upper hand. He was not afraid to take immense risks now, as this whole endeavor was one big risk anyway. For example, one misty morning they were surprised by a French tank attack. Rommel went right up to the front, ordering his troops to fire their signal pistols at the incoming tanks. Surprised and confused, the French tanks veered off. That gave Rommel's artillery enough time to find its targets. By the night of the 14th, the Germans had successfully punched through the last line of defense at the Meuse River. The command, "Pursue with all weapons," meant that French resistance in that area had been broken. The next day, Rommel found himself staring down the French-Belgian border at Montcornet, as a halt order was imposed on all of Hoth's divisions. They were standing in front of the extended Maginot Line. It was not as well fortified as the Maginot Line to the east and south, but still dangerous enough that they were given the direct order to not risk the tanks and leave it to the infantry to break through. By late afternoon of the 16th, though, Hoth gave the cautious order to probe the defenses. However, he almost immediately clarified that no breakthrough should be attempted. But Rommel was long gone by then.
Yeah, so that's almost a mistake. He was like, all right, boys, maybe you can check. Where's Rommel gone? Oh, no. But for those of you who don't know, just briefly as well, the Maginot Line was a string of kind of border defences between the Franco-German border, and as the years kind of pre-war happened, the French attempted to extend this along kind of the Belgian border, although they didn't actually get to the same extent. And this is what the Germans circumnavigated by going through the Ardennes, because the Maginot Line was deemed kind of impenetrable from the German border, which of course is why the Germans went over it, went around it. But yeah, so the Maginot Line, a string of concrete bunkers, basically just to create as much of a headache for an attacking force as it would be. And again, as I said, it's a perfectly reasonable thing. Germany had limited resources. This was a huge gamble in themselves just doing this. Obviously, you want to kind of stack the odds in your favour anyway. And Rommel weren't about that. He weren't about to relatively just let the German assault engineers do his job for him, which we will see.
The 7th Division crossed the French border on its own and spotted a whole system of interlocking concrete bunkers with armored cupolas, tank ditches, and other obstacles. At first glance, it seemed impossible to break through without heavy artillery and air support. But as the sun was fading, Rommel decided to attempt something unseen before in military history: a surprise armored night attack directly against a fortified line while on the move. It was near suicidal, but it was also the last thing the French fortress divisions had anticipated that night. The first tanks of Rommel's armored wedge smashed through the first defenses before the French were able to react. Still, resistance was formidable. Vehicles were knocked out left and right by anti-tank guns and artillery firing from the bunkers. Nevertheless, enough German tanks were already within the perimeter to silence the forward bunkers with direct hits. In that lull, the 7th's combat engineers moved into action, throwing themselves with satchel charges and flamethrowers against the fieldworks. Firing on the move to all sides, the panzers sped on, quickly followed by the agile motorcycle companies. The only way to escape now was forward. At top speed, they raced towards the French artillery, never stopping. At 11 at night, they had finally punched through the second line and suddenly saw only open terrain in front of them. Rommel wrote this in his diary: "We were through the Maginot Line. It was hardly conceivable. 22 years before, we had stood for 4.5 long years before those self-same enemy and had won victory after victory, but yet finally lost the war. And now we had broken through the renowned Maginot Line and were driving deep into enemy territory. It was not just a beautiful dream, it was reality."
And that's something to think about as well. It's the First World War, remember. It was a devastating conflict, not just for the, as they said, the holdover of the First World War is very much placed in the history books on Britain and France kind of thing. But Germany also, suffered hugely in the First World War because they was also fighting on two fronts. On the Eastern Front, obviously, until the Russian front collapsed with the Bolshevik Revolution, but particularly with the Western Front. And that's the thing, for 4 years, they attempted to drive into France. And it just became stalemate after bloody stalemate after bloody stalemate. Hundreds of thousands of men lost for hardly any gain. And now suddenly Second World War happens. He's through. He's broken through the several layers of French defence, and suddenly he's just got the green fields of France running beyond. And not just for Rommel, but I imagine for practically the entirety of German high command in this invasion of France. They must be thinking, this is outrageous. the First World War was such a bogged down conflict, and yet Second World War they've achieved what took them, well, they didn't even achieve in a matter of weeks. They've knocked France out in a campaign in which took, the years in the First World War, which, it must have been quite the pleasant surprise, I suppose, for the German High Command, not so much for the French or the British or the Allies. But yeah.
But even this unimaginable success would be only temporary if not exploited. Instead of stopping, Rommel drove his armored spearhead onward, speeding at night over the French roads toward the city of Avesnes. They suddenly crashed right into the French 5th Motorized Infantry Division, which had neatly parked its tanks and vehicles on the roadside before going to sleep. Now, they awoke to the sound of grinding metal and the fire of heavy guns. Paralyzed by the sudden, violent appearance, the surviving French scattered in all directions, throwing down their weapons in panic. Rommel was gone as quickly as he had arrived. All along the road to Avesnes, the French were caught by surprise, and soon the night was illuminated by burning tanks and trucks. By 6 a.m., Rommel stood at the Sambre River, but as the sun rose, he came to the grim realization that he was in a seriously dangerous situation. He'd been so busy advancing, almost 50 kilometers over the night, that he had not noticed that only the few tanks of his spearhead and a handful of motorcycle platoons had been able to keep up with his ludicrous speed. In fact, much of the main body was still at the Maginot Line and on Belgian territory. Ammunition and fuel were low, so Rommel ordered his battered and exhausted tank crews to guard the bridge, while he himself would establish contact with the rest of his forces. It must have dawned on him that his daring exploit had left his forces isolated in the midst of enemy territory. So, pedal to the metal, the crew of his armored command vehicle raced back along the same road back to the east. News spread fast. French soldiers spoke of a German breakthrough, causing further chaos and confusion. French high command tried to make sense of the reports, which seemingly multiplied the advancing forces by the hour. No one knew where this German division was or what it had planned, so this operation earned the 7th Panzer Division the French nickname La Division Fantôme, the Ghost Division.
They are the punishment elite, born to compete, never retreat. Living or dead, always ahead, led by your dread.
On his way back, Rommel encountered whole columns of confused, directionless French soldiers whose officers did not know how to react to the news. It could not have helped that suddenly a German armored vehicle was racing towards them from the other direction, firing wildly and scattering them off the road. Rommel ordered his driver not to stop for anything, but suddenly they were behind a large column of trucks moving towards the front. Now, bear with me here. The convoy of 40 trucks was guarded with machine guns, and Rommel drove up and passed it. Then he stopped the lead vehicle, told the French officer to stand down, and then ordered the crew of 40 trucks to get out and disperse. And he basically did this with his commanding tone and his German general's uniform alone. And this is not the only occasion he did something like that. And such was the chaos that French soldiers actually came up to his vehicle, hopefully asking, "Anglais?" But it was a ghost division for German command as well.
Okay, so just briefly, yeah. So that's what I mentioned actually in the song reaction, that I'd heard the story and I didn't know if it was true or not, but obviously it must be. That he's essentially just holed up an entire French column or of convoy rather, and just told them to disperse with a tank. Which again is pretty mental. But also at the same time, we need to talk about, there is a fair degree of luck involved in this. The gamble after gamble after gamble that was paying off, which I suppose in one sense is correct, in that the entire offensive, the entire French offensive was one huge gamble. So there was a few minor ones involved in there. But a couple of times, several times during the French offensive, not just with Rommel's division, but several panzer divisions did actually run an extreme risk of cutting themselves off or spreading too thin, which, again, you'd argue, or this is where a lot of historians criticise, particularly the French and their kind of response to the kind of conflict is, if the French perhaps or the Allies as a whole were a bit more coordinated, a bit more kind of concentrated, then perhaps the effectiveness of these armoured pushes would have been kind of rendered null, and had they been able to respond properly, then perhaps they could have cut off these divisions in enemy lines. But as we know, that didn't happen. But yeah, it's just quite comical. But I suppose he's about to say is that another reason why it's called the Ghost Division is because German High Command also had no idea where he was.
Rommel had presented them with a fait accompli. The French lines were breached, but on such a narrow front that many believed it was a trap set by the French to lure them in. Nonetheless, the success of his unauthorized push had not only saved countless German lives, but also decisively sped up the whole campaign by days or even weeks. The French Second Corps had dissolved in panic. The 1st French Armored Division was more or less wiped out, and many other French divisions were disorganized or badly mauled. Rommel's attack was an extreme version of German operational warfare, but its strongest effect was psychological. Anything short of a breakthrough would have seen Rommel court-martialed, but his success earned him the Knight's Cross instead. Adolf Hitler himself congratulated Rommel after the campaign, but also scolded him with the words, "Your raid has cost me a sleepless night." Hitler was certainly not the only one.
They are the Panzer Division, born to compete, never retreat. Living or dead, always ahead, led by your breath.
Okay, so I'm back. Sorry about that. But I thought this the Sabaton history might perhaps go actually more into Rommel himself, which was my anticipation in the song reaction, but they didn't. So I'll just do a kind of pocket history of Rommel, because for me particularly, the place where Rommel was probably most well known as a Brit. I don't know how it is for the rest of the world. I imagine it would be the same for the Brits and the Commonwealth, generally speaking, because Rommel was more well known for us, less in the French campaign, and more for his role in North Africa, where he got the nickname Desert Fox. Obviously, that makes sense because he was predominantly fighting British and Commonwealth forces in North Africa. And as I mentioned in the original song reaction, interestingly enough, the British kind of almost used this kind of this theory of autonomy, this force concentration in Operation Compass, rather, not Compass, in North Africa against the Italians. You know, so briefly, just with that, the Italians had huge number superiority, all in North Africa, and the British never, in the whole course of Operation Compass, never had more than about 30,000 people. And just like what Rommel done here and what the Armoured Corps done in France, the British detachment kind of armour concentrate their force and punch through the Italian lines time and time again, doing encirclements, taking thousands of people captured, doing encirclements, taking thousands of people captured, and basically put the Italians on the run. And just as the Italians were trying to retreat from Benghazi, a detachment, much like Rommel himself, raced ahead of the actual main armoured column and cut them off near Bey de Fon. And you know, just like the French convoys, the British basically surrounded the Italians, and by the end of Compass, they had covered over 500 miles into Italian-occupied North Africa, with no more than 30,000, taken over, I think it was like 130 odd thousand prisoners, and all of that cost them around 2,000 casualties. So much like Rommel's own campaign in France, in the French offensive, taking this initiative, moving forward, kind of attack is the best kind of defense in a way. You know, if you keep hitting your enemy before they have a chance to set themselves, then it's amazing, and you cost yourselves less damages in the future, both in vehicles and in casualties. And so I find it quite interesting. I don't actually know for definite whether Operation Compass was inspired by people like Rommel, but I'd like to think that I would imagine so, given the kind of similarities in tactics. But it was also after Operation Compass, which is where Rommel got deployed to Africa. Hitler, paying attention to the Italian defeats and the British gains, he deployed Rommel from his success in the French campaign, where he was put in charge of the Africa Corps, at the precise time where a lot of Allied troops as well were shipped off to Greece. Okay, I thought somebody was trying to break into my house then. No, it's the postman. But so he arrived as a lot of the more experienced troops as well was actually being shipped off to Greece or being rotated around at the perfect time for him to arrive. So again, Rommel has turned up at an extreme fortuitous time, which I suppose lends itself to the phrase, you know, although you can say, like as I said, a lot of what Rommel done came down to a lot of good luck and good fortune, but fortune favours the bold, fortune favours the brave, and he made his own luck by being kind of aggressive, by taking those initiative and kind of pushing the Allies to their extent. You know, and obviously when he arrived in Africa, he helped counterattack and drove the Allies all the way back to Tobruk, but Tobruk resisting twice gave him a huge supply headache because, you know, what would kind of be the hallmark for the entire German campaign during the Second World War, lack of fuels, lack of resources, poor supply lines, kind of cost him a little bit in North Africa. Eventually he managed to push the Allies all the way back to El Alamein, which is where he actually got promoted to Field Marshal. But as we know in our timeline, after the first Battle of El Alamein, Rommel was beat by Claude Auchinlec's forces, which, for the good measure, Claude Auchinlec got sacked by Churchill because apparently he was taking too long to organise a counterattack, replaced by Montgomery, who took even longer to plan, which, you know, somewhat paradoxical. Sorry, that's just a minor rant, because I do feel like Claude Auchinlec's kind of contribution to World War II is a bit overshadowed by Montgomery, when really he actually done an amazing job in North Africa himself with the resources that he had. But obviously, you know, it's where in public consensus as well, Montgomery kind of becomes the main nuisance of Rommel in North Africa. And that's where the second Battle of El Alamein kind of routed Rommel, practically destroyed, you know, huge amounts of the Afrika Korps. The Afrika Korps didn't really exist after the second Battle of El Alamein. There was just, you know, I think he was left with 20 tanks, or maybe even less than 20 tanks after the second Battle of El Alamein. And, you know, of course, at the same time as the Allies are pushing from the east, from, you know, El Alamein westward, Operation Torch is happening at the same time. And at this point, after Rommel was able to evade capture after El Alamein, he was recalled to Europe, where he was placed in charge of the Atlantic Wall as the commander of Army Group B. And yeah, you know, as I said, as the war drifted on, he became increasingly disillusioned with Hitler, and he, along with a group of other officers as well, was trying to push towards a kind of peace with the Allies, or at least thinking of a peace with the Allies. And eventually some of these conspirators who would then go on to attempt to assassinate Hitler approached him, and when they failed under torture, his name got brought up. Now, historians and things like this, it's uncertain, it's debated whether Rommel actually had any part of the coup or not, but the point is, when his name was brought up, he was approached and essentially he was given a couple of orders. He was given the option of suicide and be buried with full state honours and as a hero of the Reich, or he was given the option of being tried as high treason, you know, and kind of being publicly labelled a traitor. And obviously with that, there's the silent threat as well to, you know, his family and his loved ones and things like that as well. And Rommel chose suicide. Again, unknown whether he actually had any part of the assassination or whatever, but without a doubt, Rommel is, without a doubt, one of the most famous and probably one of the most captivating military commanders, certainly of the Second World War, but I'd argue, you know, in terms of like his personality and his tenacity and things like this, he's certainly one of the more kind of interesting characters in military history, in my opinion. But let's talk about how the song was made.
Ghost Division is one of the most, if not the most, requested songs of this entire Sabaton History series. And we haven't specifically saved it to starve people of what they want to see, but we wanted to space out like your hits and your most popular songs and stuff. Okay, so now we're here at Ghost Division. What's the first thing that leaps to your mind when you think of not the fans, not the popularity of the song, but the song?
Oh, good question. So much. I mean, it was new for us, that style being so hard-hitting and direct, but also so many memories. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the strongest memories we can have from a concert is the first couple of seconds on stage. Sometimes, I mean, we might have been on the stage sound checking, which
Yeah,
we
sure.
usually have, rarely see in the crowd. And for us, I mean, imagine some of the strongest memories I have is running out in front of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, and in a few cases, hundreds of thousands of people with the words, "Fast as the wind, the invasion has begun."
As the wind, the invasion has begun. Shaking the ground with the force of thousand guns.
Those are powerful memories, my friends. That is, wow. Yeah, I got a reel playing in my head. I wish I could show you what's going on in my head right now. This is a weird one, actually. I remember it very clearly. It's how we're standing on stage. This is in Athens, 2008, 2009.
Okay, a little while ago.
Yeah, and we're playing the song Ghost Division. And all of a sudden, everything goes, I'm still singing this, but everything goes into slow motion mode, or, you know, maybe moving at a higher clock
So far,
frequency.
this is incredibly hippie, and I have
Yeah.
no idea where you're going with this.
There were no drugs involved in this experience. Anyway, I remember totally like, oh, here I am in Greece, having a great time on a stage, great crowd, and I haven't had any other job in over a year. I guess I'm a professional musician. And that's how I realized.
Wow. Okay, that's a great ending to that. I really wondered where you were going with that. That's
how I
that's
realized.
a major pivotal moment in your life.
It was, and I mean, I wasn't, you know, I always loved music. I always wanted to play music. But for me to have that as my main profession, it wasn't a huge life goal. My life did not depend, or my happiness did not depend on that happening.
Okay, sure.
I loved playing music. I was going to do it as long as I could, but I always thought I'd do something else on the side. I'd train for radio stuff, music production,
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
stuff like that. So I
Yeah, but
thought
you are a good studio guy. Like, even you like to sit around and twiddle by
Yes,
yourself. You know?
I do.
Yeah, you know, so.
So, I mean, I thought I'd be related to it, you know, in the industry somehow. But for me to just realize that, bam, on stage, this is over 10 years ago now. I remember that so clearly.
I have a very important question, and I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for all of the people. What was your last job before you didn't have to have another job? The very last one. You don't have to say which McDonald's it was.
How did you know?
I just lucky. Yeah.
No, it was for one of Sweden's larger telecommunications companies.
Okay.
Everything from helping customers on the phone to what also, well, if somebody was a technician and patching a phone line, and they needed to know which patch to go into to connect the new phone service and stuff like that.
Oh, was this done only by phone or internet? I asked because of your hair.
No, I was on the phone all the time. I would basically be on a computer terminal looking at, oh yeah, no, you can't use patch B5 because it's busy there. You'll have to go into that one or install a new one.
But this is okay. This is a proper professional job. This is a white collar job.
Yep.
And had you not been famous, you could see yourself doing specifically that for the next 40 years, something along those lines.
No, not really. When I did that, I would only get like contracts for a couple of months and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember clearly that I wanted to ask them for leave.
Yeah.
Where before we did the 2006 tour with Edguy and Dragon Force, we went on tour there. I asked for leave for like 2 months, and can I come back? And they told me like, no, I couldn't.
Going on tour.
I'm going on tour. Fuck you guys, basically.
It's
So
a
there's
major
no
tour. Like,
yeah.
that's with Edgar and Dragon Force. That's a.
That was the first big tour we did with Nightliners and everything. So for
Yeah.
us, it wasn't no easy deal for
You're
me.
not gonna say no to that. I mean, actually, to be honest, there are a lot of people that would say no to that, and that's a shame.
Yep.
Because okay, I understand. Let's say okay, if you have a pregnant girlfriend or a pregnant boyfriend, and you have to take care of. I'm trying to be gender neutral.
Yeah.
And you're trying to take care. Yeah, I can understand. No, I've got to do a response. But you know,
Well,
it was just you.
Yeah, it was just me, and it's, you know, also I totally understand everybody chooses a different path in life, and I am lucky in that way that I didn't have a super good employer, and I'm lucky that I didn't have
they
a
gave
really
you time
good.
that you came back.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, for me, it was an easy choice.
Yeah.
So I mean, in many cases, I know several really good musicians myself that aren't musicians because they. It's not only about their choices. It's where are you in your life when you have the opportunity to do something with your music? Have you spent years on another career? Do you have a good employer? Do you have a kid on the way?
Yeah.
All of these things. So I mean, I gotta say, we are pretty damn lucky. There's so many good musicians out there that
No, I'm absolutely
that
with you.
didn't do it.
And I'll tell you what, I've just decided, okay, you know how this episode's going to end? I want you to Photoshop it so it looks like he's flipping burgers, right? And then I want you to play really uplifting music, like, heartbreaking, like, no, it's not going to be, it doesn't have to, just a still picture.
Okay.
Or something. They're probably showing actually us talking about this right now, you know that. But it should say something like, to all those great musicians unsung. Thank you from Sabaton history. To all those musicians who sacrificed their musical lives for duty, for family, for honor, for fear, for complacency, or for even a better life. 10 points.
Okay, so just pausing that there. There's only a few more seconds to go. Yeah, I said that wasn't really what I expected. I was expecting more about kind of talking about the actual song and how it was made and the lyrics and stuff like that. But in a weird way, I'm almost way happier that they didn't talk about that because, as I said, I don't know the band too well. I'm still trying to learn kind of their I'm trying to learn their names, and kind of how they act. But I actually really like that story of, like kind of his journey, I suppose, into doing this because. We all get set off on paths, and some of you watching this might be, about to start those paths. You might be going off to university, or you might still be in school, or something like this. And it is hard, finding your way in the world, really, basically. I still haven't found mine. Although as I said, I went to university. I've got my degrees. I work in education. I still don't necessarily know for certain whether this is me, and I'm still trying to find that, to be brutally honest. But the idea of him, like never having that kind of true dream, I suppose, to be, a musician, and yet that's kind of what he does, and the fact that what I really liked was when he said, he had that slow motion moment where it's just like, I'm here. I can just imagine how that was feel. I mean, as I said, I don't really have much in kind of comparison to that, except from one thing, I suppose, is that when I was younger, some years ago now, I went skydiving for the first time, and I absolutely adore it. If you can do it and you can do it safely, then go and do it. But I absolutely adore it, and as a result, I've been back a number of times, got jump certificates and things like this. But there was this time I remember explicitly on my first jump when I was still strapped onto somebody and going towards this airplane, and then we went, and there's this moment that when you're on the kind of looking out over, I was like 10,000 feet or something like that, you can just see, the ground below you, the wind's whipping through. As soon as that door opens, it's an icy chill, and then you go, and it's almost just like the strange feeling, because you feel like you're flying, or you feel like you're floating, not flying. And then there's this strange feeling that because you're not in control, and if something goes wrong, that's it. At first you don't succeed. So much for skydiving. But there's this strange feeling that I came to this realization that as I'm floating, you expect some sort of dread or adrenaline. Maybe other people do, but for me, as I was falling towards the ground, fate completely out of my control. I've got to trust fully into this guy and this bit of silk that he's attached to. And suddenly I came to this realization that this is life. It's not the boring, the mundane, getting up and doing the same old things and things like this. Like falling like this, floating, being on top of the earth, I'm alive. You know, I know that probably sounds like such a strange tangent, but I suppose that's a bit of a similar thing to Joachim when he was talking about that, when he had that realization that, you know, he's a musician now. And I think that's so much what people should do. And if you're watching this, this is what I want, well, what I hope you can do, and that is, in your life, you find something that you love, whether that is your job, or whether that is a hobby, or whether that is anything. You find something that you love, that you care about, that makes you feel alive, that makes you feel, you know, amazing or worth something. You know, because some people don't, you know, some people unfortunately don't feel like they're worth anything. You know, and I feel like it's a path that a lot of us go through at some point. You know, we all feel like we aren't worth, you know, the air that we're breathing. But we all are. You know, and it's just a matter of finding that place in which we do feel like we belong, that, you know, this is what we're meant to do, or this is what we are doing. As I said, I felt alive through skydiving, I still do. But I haven't found, you know, that exact calling for my job. Maybe I won't. But that doesn't mean that just because you don't find that in your job doesn't mean that there aren't other things in your life that you can find a belonging, that you can find a real passion and joy about. And I apologise, because this is supposed to have been a history video and it's kind of gone into Mike's life pro tips. So if you're still watching this, thank you for one. You know, because again, I enjoy doing this, particularly during the summer when I don't actually have any you know, anybody to help usually. So, you know, it's nice being able to just talk, you know, and by doing this, when I do the history, it's a bit more lighthearted because it feels like I'm talking more to you guys rather than talking about something. But I've rambled long enough. Let's get back to the end of this video, because you're probably all thoroughly sick of me right now.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you so much for the support with the community. All the Patreons, everyone who's helping, sharing this. We really love doing this, and thanks to you, we can keep on doing it. So keep on doing what you do, and we will keep on doing what we do. Thank you.
Okay, so you heard the man. Again, as I said, if you head over and support them on Patreon, you know, they do an amazing job. I absolutely adore Sabaton History, not just for, you know, educational wise, but for things like song making, video making, and, you know, things like this now where you actually hear stories. And I'm really glad that I listened to this, because I feel like after listening to this, I kind of emphasize a lot more with some of the members of Sabaton themselves, you know, in order to get to where they are. But I've been Mike with History. This has been Ghost Division, the story of Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, Sabaton History. I hope you enjoyed, and please stay safe, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you ever so much for watching. Bye bye.